Yeah.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with the self-introduction, where you are currently, what you're doing, and what are your interests?
I am Vaisakh CP. I did my PhD from IISER Thiruvananthapuram. I worked with Dr. Rajeev Kini. I graduated in 2019, and in 2019 July I joined my current institute, which is Institute of Physics of Czech Academy of Science. And I'm a postdoc here, and yeah, I've been working here since July 2019.
So how do you explain your current situation with respect to the pandemic? So how has the pandemic affected you, and in what all ways has it affected you? How is your institute back where you're doing a postdoc or your PhD, handling the
Yeah,
whole situation?
I think the pandemic has, it is affecting me on many levels, like most of the people, everywhere in the world. I mean, academically, personally. Um, in the beginning, in March, we started to have serious lockdown here in Prague, and I did stay home for probably 2 weeks or something. That too, I did not. I went to office once in a while, and though I did stay home for maybe 2 weeks during the hard lockdown, but since April, I frequented my labs. So what I was supposed to do did not happen, uh, almost entirely because of the pandemic. Yeah, I mean it's in a standstill.
I mean, yeah, that's unfortunate, right? Like almost,
Yeah,
yeah, and specifically to you guys because your work is really stressful and taxing, and a lot of PhDs have to do their work in a continuous stretch of time, and suddenly people are asking you to stop your work
yeah.
in between, and if you stop them, you'll have to come back again and start from scratch, and that's really taxing and stressful.
But my supervisor, he is completely cool about it. He's like, "This
Hmm.
pandemic, what can you do? You
That's
can stay
true.
here. We'll give you an extension.
Yeah,
You
I
can finish
mean,
it." But
that
he's, I don't know. I haven't met many supervisors like him. I mean, we have this. Probably not just me. Many people in academia, business, or I mean, they will have this. What have you done lately in 2020? Nothing much. I mean, to be honest, at least not how much you expected to do because of this. But I think I'm not alone in this. Is what
very true. I
that's
mean
my
that.
go-to thought when I have these.
I mean that's actually very true, and it's important that we remind ourselves that it's not just me that
Mm,
everybody is on the same boat because this pandemic is global,
yeah.
right? Like everybody somewhere, in some way are getting affected by this. I mean, there is nothing as
Yeah.
global as this pandemic that we have ever seen. I mean, weather, yes, it's restricted to one particular area. If it's raining here in Bangalore, to me,
That that that, that
I can go to some other place and have a beautiful weather, but I can't do that with pandemic, right? It's
mm,
not like I can escape from the boundary of this pandemic. So I think people will understand. People should understand that
yeah.
this is a tough time, uncertain at times. So you have to
Yeah.
be. That's good. You've got a good guide there.
Yeah. But
So
yeah, that I don't think we have not seen an imminent crisis like this.
very true.
Maybe not after Second World War started.
Mm. And yeah, the intensity
Nobody
is
knows
that
how
bad.
to
Yeah,
deal with
very
this.
true. Yeah, so often you get this question from your juniors whenever they want to apply abroad. You're
Mm,
usually asked like, what are the procedures and what am I supposed to be prepared for when I'm applying for a PhD or when I'm
mm.
applying for a postdoc? And this is something common that you have been asked or you have asked your seniors when you're back doing your
Yeah,
PhD.
sure, yes.
But right now, along with that question, people also tend to ask, how is this pandemic going to affect my study in abroad if I plan on doing a PhD abroad? At the same time, there are a lot of people who are trying to reconsider the whole plan of them studying abroad because of the
Mm,
consequences that they might face if they travel abroad, and parents would also not be encouraging to their children to send them abroad
mm,
and all. So what do you think of the whole situation? Do you think students who are planning to apply
mm.
abroad should rethink about studying abroad, or do you think they shouldn't be sacrificing
Mm.
their goals or dreams on studying further with respect? I mean, obviously we can suggest something to them. Yeah, it's study abroad programs, especially for PhDs and other things. So how do you think this whole pandemic might have affected the PhD programs, or do you think it's going to make a lot of difference with how international students are accepted in universities?
I'm not quite sure, but the thing is, I know a few cases. Some of my juniors who have applied for their PhD position, they've got accepted, but they had a huge delay in getting their visas. I don't know if it's inherently if it had always been like this in a German embassy, if the procedures took this long, but so otherwise I will have to think about it, because
yeah, that's true,
and also speculate, which I don't think is a very responsible thing to do quickly. I mean, maybe it's possible that there will be some areas which will have a lot of funding and some of it will lose it, because it's possible that the funding agencies will have their preferences different after a pandemic. So there is a general consensus that we need to have more funding in science, not just in India but everywhere. There are many political philosophers who says that we have a problem of amnesia. We forget pretty fast what happens. So once we are out of this pandemic, or we might be, our politics might be more aligned to have a different kind of strategy. So I don't know. I think it's very difficult to answer the question. So there are some obvious things one should consider when he applies for a PhD. First of all, is he? I mean, does he really like it? I mean, is this area of research really important to him? I mean, is he passionate about it? That's very obvious. Second is is that we should all be considered about the economic, financial aspects. I mean, you should be paid well. That goes without saying. These two things are obvious, and one should check the publication history and how have a background check about his supervisor, and these things are all automatic, and one will definitely, if somebody wants to do a PhD, he will, or a postdoc, he will definitely look for these things. But when we have this pandemic in the background, this is something which these days I think is very important, to go to a place which has a very good very good public medical program, where you don't have to worry too much if you'll have to sell your kidney to get your treatment done. Along with the usual things we consider, I think one should also be aware of how good the health sector of a country or a city is. That is very important, because one of my friends recently had a serious infection here, not corona, but he had a tuberculosis, and he had been in, he received full treatment for 5 months. He was in the hospital entirely without any extra charges or anything. In Czech Republic, the public health system is pretty good, at least to the ones we have in India. I mean, these are different countries, but I'm not playing a blame game there. But yeah, there are very rich countries with very poor health systems. So one has to consider this also.
That's true.
Yeah, this is something. I mean, I don't know, something to do with my political leaning also. I believe that governments should invest in public. So this comes from there.
That's true. I mean, another thing that was that the pandemic shed light on in the recent past was on mental health. A lot of
Yeah.
people, specifically in India, started realizing the severity of mental health and how terrible it can be on a person, because almost everybody I know has been affected in one way or the other during the pandemic. Maybe because of the isolation they were in, or maybe because of
Mm-hmm.
very less social interactions. So obviously, doing a PhD itself is a very tough
Yeah.
job. So is postdoc. So, if you don't mind me asking, was there any sort of mental issue or health issue that you went through during this lockdown? And if so, what were the ways what are the things you did so as to overcome them, like to make yourself feel better? Because the reason why I'm asking this is there might be somebody who might have felt the same thing as what you have felt, and
Mm-hmm.
you helping them out with what you did to help yourself out could help them understand, do better.
Mm.
Maybe you
Yeah.
can talk about your the stories you've heard about your friends or like someone during the pandemic.
Yeah. The second, when I said the pandemic had, it affected not just academically, it also affected me personally. Is that I don't want to talk. Because I'm not a very
Right.
I'm not an extrovert. I it's okay for me to talk to my friends once in a week. I don't want to socialize all the time, but I don't like sitting in my room all the time. That was very draining for me. I had to go out, and uh, yeah, so you couldn't do that for a really long time. I had, you know, extensive plans for, trips all around the country and abroad. I mean, during the summer and spring and summer, I had planned a lot of hikes, found places people don't. Yeah, usually, and none of that happened. I was devastated, really. So that actually did made me very sad, to be honest. But there was nothing I could do about it back then. But then, once the restrictions were a bit eased in Czech Republic after the first wave,
Hmm.
I did travel a little bit within the country, and I started to explore the parts of cities which Prague is a very beautiful city. So yeah, I travel. I mean, walk around a lot. And I don't know how much it helped. I'm still very sad about all that plans that couldn't work. So the thing is, one go-to thought I always have is that it's not just me. There are like billions of people who go through the same thing. That help. I mean, this tunnel vision can actually really make you very, very depressed. And
Hmm.
so I've heard my friends say that
Hmm.
when they complain about the pandemic, I say that you're not alone. Yeah. But the thing is, at least if I was stuck in IISER like some of my juniors,
Hmm.
my situation is at least a little better. I can still go around to the park and again roam around in city, at least
Hmm.
some areas. So yeah, I
Um,
manage my life with these thoughts. So yeah.
So often, like once we pass a phase, like say when you graduate from your 10th standard to your like 11th or 12th, or from 11th or
Mm,
12th to undergraduation, or from undergraduation to PhD to postdoc. So there's always a sort of realization we have, "Oh, okay, I should have done this a couple of years back, so that would have been an advantage to me right now. I should have done this
mm,
in my undergraduation so that in my PhD, when I'm doing it right now elsewhere, it's going to, it could have helped me in this way." Is there something
mm,
you regret not doing or doing in your past? And the reason why I'm asking this is because you could help a lot of your juniors to start developing those skills or something right now so that it could benefit them in that when they're doing their
mm.
PhD or something.
Yeah. One thing I always regretted is not taking math very seriously.
Hmm.
The thing is, I always done this. I mean, even in my when I did my IPhD there. So during my bachelor days, I would ignore my subsidiary math lessons like anything. I learned that only to survive. I shouldn't have done that. This is something I regret to this date. And probably you probably have heard this from me. This is the same
Mm.
regret from many people. But ignoring math when you do physics is not a good thing.
Mm. Sure.
Even though I was always inclined towards experimental physics, I thought if something comes up, I can manage it. Then I mean, if that's a mistake. Some people shouldn't do that.
Mm.
And and deciding too early is another, because
Mm.
I've seen many of my IISER juniors and colleagues who had made up their mind too early when they are really not in a position to make a very informed choice. I know students who come to IISER to learn, say, chemistry. They make up their mind when immediately when they leave or they get admitted to IISER. I think those decisions can be made later when you have more information or more, you can have it as a informed choice. I had made up a mind that I'll be doing experimental science immediately, when I got into my PhD. Not that I regret this choice, but I sometimes doubt whether it was the right thing to have made that decision too early. So that is something I tell if some of my students, some of my juniors ask me what should I do. I'm like, you keep an open mind about what you want to do, gather as much information as possible, and then make a decision.
Mm.
And 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 yeah, I mean, if you make a decision with the maximum possible, amount of information you have with you, I think that's the best you can do. But make sure that one should make sure that they have all the information they need to.
I think that you raised a very important point because often when I see, or even me sometimes, have very less patience, and often we
Yeah,
don't have that sort of open mind towards exploring different
yeah,
things. For instance, I've seen a
mm,
lot of people who from their first year start working in one particular lab and continue for the rest of their undergraduation,
yeah,
which I do not appreciate because I personally would want to or have done internships in multiple labs where I get an exposure of multiple, subjects, and then I choose
yes.
what among them interests me the most and then pursue. Because often what happens if you start with one lab,
Yeah, which is a very good thing to do.
yeah,
But what you said is very much correct, because in ICER these days, not these, I mean, I've been seeing this because I've stayed at ICER for 7 years.
mm,
So during which I've seen people who join a lab immediately when they come in to secure their position there.
very true.
Uh, which, yeah, but the thing is, I don't know, they are compelled to do that. Is it because of peer pressure, and due to all that, when they have to choose a
Mm,
major project, will they ever get something they really want?
mm,
So there is this problem. I mean, and even faculties prefer students who are experienced in their lab to do their
yeah.
master projects so that they can give serious projects to them. If there's something, what I would advise, who's doing their BSMS and ICER is to not to fix anything,
Mm.
to try out things. I did not try out much. I regret that. I made decisions too early because of this fear. Yeah, but one can avoid that if
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So it's a good point you raise because a lot of students could benefit at least from now. They can start exploring because often what happens is you see one senior who is doing the same thing and you sort of try to follow because you think that could be the normal way or the general way of doing things. But unless because and also people are really
yes.
scared to explore different fields before, as you said, they want to fixate their presence in
Mm.
the lab to the professor. So often professors, it also depends on the
Mm-hmm.
professors because professors always choose someone who is working in the lab for like 4 years rather than coming to lab for 1 year and then doing something.
Yes.
I think that needs to be
And
removed from people's mind.
if they've trained somebody for so long, they want to keep that student too. Yeah. So it's not just the students. I think the whole system drives them in this direction, I guess.
We look deeper, there are a couple of advantages which we could recognize with respect to the whole pandemic situation. For instance, you might have heard about these talks in the beginning of the pandemic where people started talking about how the environment is sort of healing up because of the whole, slowdown in the movement of vehicles or like everything. So, could you think of any such advantages or disadvantages that the pandemic has brought with respect to your research field, or you can also talk in general?
One advantage could be that at least some people have an idea on what the real issues are. I guess now we know that what can really save us is science. I mean, your rationale. I hope that this will translate to funding, more funding in science for relevant areas. And at least people will think, what would a scientist do, and what if there's a crisis? I mean, instead of imagining what what church would do, or what what a politician would do. I think that kind of a change might have happened because I believe that human beings are. We frequently come across this comparison where we are frogs sitting in boiling pot. We stay there until we die. I mean, many of our big ecological and political problems are like, something of this sort. We just sit there. Nothing goes terribly bad from day to day. So we probably will have a different take on this. At least some people will have a different take on this thing. Probably will believe more in science. So I don't know, but I hope more people believe, the scientific, the method.
That was a very good perspective you talked about. How we should start respecting science and prioritize that over other things we often tend to believe in.
Yes. Yes. I think even politically, people that is one question people should ask. What have you done in the area of healthcare, for example, or public health? Yeah, it's immediately visible in our politics. But I hope this trend continues. I mean, the next during an election, at least in the developing world, people should be talking about stuff like this rather than statues or walls, big cross-country walls and stuff like that. This could, to a little bit, to small extent, change our political narrative or political conversations.
True, that's true. That was an interesting answer. I mean, you've given some really interesting answers, which sort of gave me a different perspective to look through a lot of things. That's exactly what I was expecting from this interview. No, honestly, I did.
I thought I would be completely useless because
no, definitely not. I mean,
because I don't consider a real, very serious academician. No.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like everybody is good at something, and your answers. The reason why I like your answers the most is they're very simple, and it does sound very obvious, but something that we wouldn't have thought about. When you were answering, it was very obvious to me, but I never thought through this. And it was very simple for me to understand also. It was not really scientific where you're talking about scientific terms and for me to process everything and understand. It was something that I could easily understand. It was something my mother could easily understand. It's that way. And that's exactly what I was looking forward to this interview. And I'm really happy about that.
Very interesting enterprise. So I'd like to
Thank you.
Someday I can.
And thank you again for making this interview.
No problem.
And
It was very nice talking to you, man. But
yeah,
I did most of the talking, so
yeah, it's
maybe
fine.
next
I
time I'll
like.
interview you.
Yeah. All right then. I'll see you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Have a nice weekend.
Yeah, man. Thank you.